Today, many people laugh at the Trabant, calling it the worst car ever made. A noisy little box with a two-stroke engine and a body made of plastic. But back in East Germany, this car was much more than just transportation. For millions of families behind the Iron Curtain, the Trabant was freedom, a dream come true, and even a symbol of national pride. To understand the Trabant, you have to see beyond the jokes and stereotypes, because in its time, it changed the lives of an entire generation.
Place of production.
The very first car to wear the Trabant name appeared in November 1957. It was built at the Sachsenring factory, which had once belonged to Audi. The model, known as the P50, was based on a surprisingly modern layout for its time, a unibody design, a transversely mounted engine at the front, and front-wheel drive. Most of its mechanical parts came from pre-war DKW cars. It used a two-stroke, two-cylinder, 500cc engine, producing 18 horsepower, a simple non-synchronized four-speed manual gearbox, drum brakes, and independent suspension with transverse leaf springs. But the most unusual feature of the P50 was its body. Instead of steel panels, it used Duroplast, a reinforced plastic made from phenolic resin and textile waste. This material was cheap, easy to produce, strong enough, and, most importantly, protected the steel frame from rust. Of course, it had downsides too: poor crash safety and difficult body repairs. But East Germany didn't have much choice. Sheet steel was in short supply, so Duroplast became the only real alternative. The little car looked quite charming, and buyers welcomed it warmly. One reason was the car it replaced, the AWZ P70. That model also used Duroplast panels, but on a wooden frame, with plywood, and even an imitation leather roof on the station wagon version. It was primitive and outdated, yet incredibly expensive, about 9,250 East German marks. By comparison, a Volkswagen Beetle from West Germany cost only 3,790 marks, and a Lloyd 600 was just 3,680, less than half the price of the P70. That's why when planning the Trabant, the East German ministry set very clear requirements. The new car had to be a real family car for 4 people, weigh under 600 kilograms, consume no more than 5.5 liters per 100 kilometers, and cost no more than 4,000 marks. Annual production was expected to reach at least 12,000 cars. The Trabant P50 met those demands. It was simple, practical, and affordable. But by the early 1960s, it already looked outdated and needed modernization, especially in its design. Production of the P50 continued until 1964, with around 130,000 units built. The updated model, known as P60/1, was first shown to the public in 1963, and series production began in 1964. This car, called the Trabant 601, would become the most famous and most numerous of them all. Compared to its predecessor, the 601 was longer, wider, and taller, which meant more space inside. The engine was upgraded from 0.5 to 0.6 liters, with power rising to 26 horsepower. The interior also saw improvements, better upholstery, and, at last, a proper cabin heater, something the earlier model didn't even have. The Trabant 601 turned out to be the perfect balance of simplicity and practicality. But that success created a huge problem. Demand was far greater than supply. The factory in Zwickau simply couldn't keep up. In the mid-1960s, the waiting time for a new Trabant was about 3 years. By the late 1970s, it had grown to an unbelievable 15 years. The distribution system worked much like in the Soviet Union. A buyer had to register at their local dealership, file a request, and then wait. often for over a decade. Of course, good connections could shorten the wait to a few months. Despite these difficulties, the 601 became a true icon of East Germany. Trabants were also exported across the Eastern Bloc, to Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and Hungary, and even to Western Europe. Tens of thousands were sold in the UK and the Netherlands, where the car was often seen as a quirky curiosity from the socialist East. So, what was the secret behind the phenomenal popularity of this rather unassuming little car? Part of the answer lies in the very structure of life in East Germany. There simply wasn't a free market. East Germans had no access to Opels, Volkswagens, and certainly not to prestigious BMWs or Mercedes-Benzes. Their choices were limited to Soviet models and a handful of other Eastern Bloc cars, such as Skodas or Wartburgs. And this is where the Trabant had two key advantages that made it a true people's car: affordability and simplicity. In terms of price, it was arguably the cheapest car available in East Germany. For many families, it was the only realistic way to own a car at all. But the real uniqueness of the Trabant revealed itself later, during everyday use. Its incredibly simple design gave it an almost unbelievable lifespan. On average, a single Trabant stayed on the road for more than 20 years, an extraordinary figure for a mass-produced vehicle. This wasn't just because of its rust-proof Duroplast body panels. The two-stroke air-cooled engine was so simple that practically anyone could service it. There was no conventional valve train, no valves, no camshaft, no push rods. Fuel ran into the carburetor purely by gravity, from a tank mounted above the engine, while oil had to be mixed directly into the gasoline, just like on motorcycles of the era. The lack of a liquid cooling system meant there were fewer parts to fail. With so few components, there was hardly anything to break, and repairs could often be carried out in a backyard garage, or even on the street. Even the suspension, primitive transverse leaf springs at both the front and rear, performed surprisingly well. Of course, it wasn't sporty, but for a cheap, family-oriented car, the ride quality was more than acceptable. In 1965, a station wagon version was added. And just a year later, the Kubel P601A appeared, a semi-military variant built specifically for border troops patrolling the frontier with the West. Amazingly, this model remained in production, almost unchanged, until 1990. Interestingly, the original plan was to make the Kubel entirely out of Duroplast. But, with production volumes of only about 300 to 500 cars per year, the cost of building specialized molds for plastic panels was simply too high. The compromise was clever. The front end came from the standard 601 and remained plastic, while the rest of the body was made of metal. From 1978, a civilian offshoot was also introduced, the Trabant Tramp. Marketed as a leisure and beach car, it was produced exclusively for export. You could spot them most often in Greece and Yugoslavia, where they were popular as rental cars on seaside resorts. The Trabant also made its way into motorsport, not only on local tracks in East Germany, but even on the international stage. Of course, its stock 26 horsepower was far too modest, so the engine was often modified. Different carburetors, improved exhaust systems, and even sportier crankshafts were fitted. These upgrades could boost the output to around 45 horsepower. But in semi-legal races and among private teams, tuners often went much further, swapping out the engine entirely. The most common choice was the three-cylinder Wartburg engine, delivering about 70 horsepower. In rarer cases, engines from the Lada or even the Volkswagen Golf were transplanted, turning the lightweight plastic Trabant into a surprisingly serious racing machine. Nevertheless, in official competitions like the Monte Carlo Rally, most Trabants raced with their original but tuned two-stroke engines. They never aimed for outright victory, but they consistently reached the finish line, and that alone earned them respect from both rivals and spectators. During its long life on the assembly line, the Trabant received only minor updates. The most notable were the introduction of the optional automatic clutch Hycomat in 1965 and the switch of the entire electrical system from 6 volts to the standard 12 volts in 1983. By the way, until 1983, there was no fuel gauge at all. Drivers measured the fuel level with a special dipstick directly in the tank. In 1988, an updated Trabant was shown. Its appearance was noticeably refreshed, and it really looked quite good. But it never went beyond the prototype stage. And just a year later, in 1989, even before the reunification of the two Germanys, the WAG concern acquired the Zwickau plant. And in the same 1989, the Trabant underwent the most serious modernization in its entire history. Under the hood appeared a 4-stroke engine from the Volkswagen Polo with 40 horsepower, and the body was slightly updated on the outside. This was the birth of the Trabant 1.1. But the time of this car was already running out. In the GDR, everyone understood. The Trabant's era was ending. No successor was prepared, although between 1967 and 1982, engineers created a whole series of prototypes that never managed to replace the Trabant. The Trabant outlived the GDR itself, but not for long. The last Trabant 1.1 rolled off the assembly line in April 1991. Thanks to this simple and, at first glance, rather unremarkable little car, the German Democratic Republic, by the time the Berlin Wall fell, had the highest number of cars per 1,000 people among all socialist countries, 237. After reunification, a wave of mockery and ridicule fell upon the Trabant. It was called outdated, ridiculous, even laughable. And yet, East Germans didn't abandon their people's car. Even when the roads of the former GDR were filled with Volkswagens and Mercedes, production of the Trabant continued, and it slowly turned into a symbol and an object of warm nostalgia. Ironically, the more people laughed at the Trabi, the stronger it became as a cultural icon. Today, the Trabant is a welcome guest at vintage car shows and retro rallies, and it still brings out smiles from passers-by. Its flaws are long forgotten. But the true test, the test of time, the Trabant has passed.